Yeah, because what's going to happen is, based on the lower brackets, they're going to take less out, but that doesn't mean you're going to pay less because of the rules in that. And that's part of my point, that the rules affect people differently. Because as I said, even though they lowered the rates, because we lost, using myself as an example, a lot of those deductions, the state and local tax and some of the other things, overall, our tax liability didn't really change, even though the rates were lower. And had they not had the qualified business deduction, our tax actually probably would have been higher. Okay, so, and that brings a good segue, which given now we know the outcome of the election, one of the big things that was in play, and I think I mentioned this the last time I spoke, was the status of this law. Okay, the status of this law in particular was scheduled to expire in 2026. It had what's known as a sunset provision. And for those who aren't familiar with that, what they do is that in order to pass legislation, you need the 60-vote majority in the Senate. There is a workaround in that. It's called budget reconciliation. They can do that for legislation that may involve financial aspects, and obviously tax laws do. When that's the case, that can be passed with 51 votes in the Senate. And that's how many of the tax law changes have been passed in the past few years. However, in order to do that, they have to have a 10-year window where it quote unquote sunsets so they can pass that legislation. Okay? It's sort of a nuanced workaround. I don't know why they have that, but it doesn't really matter. So the point was that legislation was scheduled to expire. So had the Harris administration taken power, the expectation was that most likely it was going to expire, or at a minimum, they were going to have to pass a compromise that would be more favorable to their objectives, right? And that's sort of what happened with the Bush tax cuts when they expired, and then we had the Obama administration where they sort of had a compromise regarding keeping those tax brackets in place, but agreeing to some other provisions. So with the outcome decided, and we know that the Trump administration will be returning to power, what does that mean? Well, it means, for example, for the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, that will likely be continued, okay? So will it be continued in its current form? Not necessarily, but it will be continued by and large. In part, they did have the Senate, the House has not been determined. My expectations is that it almost doesn't matter. It's probably going to be razor thin one way or the other. So either way, there's going to be maneuvering that will need to be done. And I think one of the big things that has been discussed in order to extend this legislation will be, there's been a lot of talk about SALT, right? Which is the state and local tax deduction, and restoring some of that. Trump has indicated a willingness to consider that, especially since he has a lot of allies in states that have high tax, and he's making friends with Silicon Valley and California. Obviously, property taxes and state income taxes is a significant issue. So I think you can see that will be something that will be there.
Because the Dow is up 1,400 points in the futures so far.
It's going to be an interesting day.